Hello, and welcome to The Square Window, the podcast that takes us on a nostalgic trip back to the golden age of kids' TV shows. I'm Gareth and I'll be your host. I've been a professional animator for nearly 3 decades and a cartoon fan all my life. And I love to share my passion about the shows I watched growing up as a kid. Joining me in this episode is Ryan Donnoghue. Ryan is an American-based animation industry veteran who's worked in film, TV, games, and theme park attractions. Some of his accomplishments include working on Futurama, Chronicles of Narnia, Percy Jackson, and he was also responsible for the development of the first Mickey Mouse ride-through attraction, Mickey and Minnie's Railway Runaway. Ryan's choice of show to talk about today is the 1985 science fiction anime Robotech. So strap in and join us as we take a trip through the square window. Hey Ryan, how's it going?
Good, Gareth. How you doing?
Man, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been really looking forward to this episode because the show that you've chosen, Robotech, is one that I really knew nothing about until you brought it up and said that's the show you want to talk about. I knew nothing about it, and since I've been researching it and watching some other videos out there and reading articles, I'm just really interested in how this came about, and
Sure.
its approach to production is amazing.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to talk about it. It's definitely, there's so many shows that I watched growing up that, always meant a lot to me, in becoming an animator.
Yeah.
But, when you asked me to be on here and ask the question, this is the one that really worked on my head in a level that like others didn't, just because of, how operatic it was. And we'll get into it more with the questions as we go on, but yeah, this one was it was so grown up to me at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one thing that immediately, when I started to look at it, to watch a few episodes and to read about it, I can see how it would have hit at your age at the time it came out, because just storyline and ongoing storyline, and it seemed very mature for the fan base it picked up at the time, and
Sure.
something fresh and new.
Yeah, absolutely.
So paint us a picture of your childhood growing up.
Sure. Yeah. I was definitely a kid, full on middle range Generation X, grew up on Star Wars and Spielberg and all of that stuff coming out of 77 through the early 80s. And I really watched a lot of TV, like a lot of TV. There used to be this cop TV show called Chips about
Oh my God.
California Highway
Yeah,
Patrol,
that was one of my
and it's all
favorites.
disco and goofy, and I can still tell you plot lines from like
Yeah,
multiple episodes of that show. I don't, yeah.
amazing.
So yeah, I was originally, grew up in the East Coast of the United States in New Jersey and just outside of New York City. And it was a real nice tree-lined place with all the seasons. And just as a little kid, I always gravitated towards stories and images. I was an active kid and I liked to play and play sports, but I really didn't like to watch sports. And it just wasn't a thing that I ever got into. And so, stuff that was like, fantastical and stuff that was spooky and macabre. And, there's influences like Edward Gorey, who is a children's book illustrator from the 60s, who is like, if you read his stuff, you see everything that Tim Burton, where he got his stuff
Oh,
from. And so part of that was animation on TV. And so from my earliest memories, I've always been just glued to the set watching anything animated that I could. And they're really like, the younger you are, there's no real like curation. You just watch whatever is there. If it's Care Bears, I'm watching Care Bears, damn
Right.
it. You know, and there was in the 80s too, especially with Saturday morning cartoons, there were so many they just threw everything at TV. And so then as I got older, we moved over to the West Coast. I grew up most of my life now in California. And yeah, like I was saying, the general TV watching regime was getting up at like I could wake up at 6:30 in the morning and turn on the TV and watch cartoons for an hour before I had to get ready for school, then go to school, come home, and then somewhere around 3 o'clock to 4:30 p.m. would be all the after school shows. So there'd be like 3 or 4 shows you'd watch in there before the 5 o'clock news came on, and then Saturday morning was like my time, and I grew up in a family with I was child number 5, and a lot of my siblings are just enough older than me that we wouldn't watch the same stuff. And so, it was like a race to get to the TV first, because there was the house had one TV, and turn it on first. And it would all be this stuff like Justice League, the Super Friends, and this Filmation Tarzan show, and
Yeah.
weird random stuff like Black Star, that
Yeah.
had a toy line that looked like He-Man before
Yeah.
He-Man came out, but the show didn't last. And all the rerunnings of Looney Tunes. They would just have like a Looney Tune hour where you're just watching all the cartoons, and part of that too, both in the morning and on the Saturday morning, there was a lot more syndication of old cartoons.
Mm.
So I really grew up not watching Disney at all,
Okay.
because until video cassettes, that stuff
Mm.
didn't air on TV.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, admittedly, like when I was a little boy, I just felt like not knowing anything about it. I thought, well, that's
Wow.
princesses. I don't want to watch it.
Yeah.
And that all changed later. But it was everything from like the 1930s on, was always on TV. So it was all the Looney Tunes, it was the Terry Tunes, Heckle and Jekyll and Casper and Walter Lance and Woody Woodpecker and Tom and Jerry, like all of it. Like you just have these blocks and just watch this stuff. And I was just always mesmerized by the art, like that I would just take in the backgrounds, just looking at the painting. And not that I thought of like, oh, I love this painting.
Yeah. Sure.
But as a kid, I just was just in love with it all. And so yeah, I grew up watching all that. And but it took me a long time to get to the point where it clicked that I wanted to be an animator.
Right.
And that started happening more towards the end of high school. But I don't know if that's is that a good answer? Should I segue
Yeah,
or
man. No, and honestly, it's even though the location differences is very similar, almost exactly the same to mine, but also similar to most of the animators that I've spoken to. It's just that
yeah,
that show or bunch of shows that grabbed them as kids on the telly, that just translated into maybe drawing and doodling them, and then taking them into down that art pathway, and then
yeah.
towards art college and so on, and then all of a sudden, bang, they're animators. So it's really nice to hear.
So I always loved drawing, but I never thought anything about it. And my parents were, definitely of the mind where you it just like a lot of people, they don't know that it's viable.
Yeah.
And then when I was a teenager, like around ninth grade, we had a new neighbor move in 2 doors down, and he was a professional illustrator, and his name was Stan Watts, and he had a barn in his backyard, because where I grew up in California was semi-rural, kind of suburb where people had horses and farm animals. We didn't, but everyone else did. And so he had a barn that he renovated into a 2-story studio,
Wow.
and the place was amazing. He had like a whole photography studio in a dark room. He had like a 20-foot wall full of flat files of his life's work. And he had 2 like desks set up for like, because it would get hot, in the
Yeah.
summertime. So he would sit downstairs, but
No
then
way.
he would his
That's
office up.
amazing.
So he had 2 offices, just depending on where he wanted to work. And so this guy moves in, and my mom casually mentions, "Oh, my son likes to draw," and he's like, "Oh, I'd love to meet the kid. Come on, send him over." Um, yeah, he asks, we just chat for a little bit, and he's like, "Yeah, I'd love to see your drawings." And then, I show him some stuff kind of sheepishly because, like, I don't know why
Mm.
I'm doing this.
Yeah, cool.
And he's like, "These are good, man. You," and, I can say from looking back now, I'm sure, maybe he saw something, but he was also just being really nice,
Yeah,
you
sure.
know? Um, and I knew, like, from me having talked to people growing up now and having taught, like, where you can kinda see interest and potential,
Mm.
and I guess he saw that with me. But his encouragement, saying I could do this, and is what really pushed me. And, the day after I met him, I sat down and I just started looking at these comic books, and I hadn't really collected comic books yet. My brother had some, and I'm looking through, and I'd never tried this before, and I just started trying to draw Spider-Man. And I was just looking at the thing, and I'm looking and drawing and looking and drawing, and to my mind, I like nailed it perfectly. Like, oh my god, like, I actually still have those drawings
No
somewhere.
way.
I saved them all. They actually might be in there, but, I digress. If I have to go look for them, it'll
Yeah,
probably
sure.
take long. Um, but, I just after that, it was like an epiphany. It was like, I wanna do this for the rest of my life. I
Wow.
don't care how or why or what it means, but this is it. And I was in, like, ninth grade, and, I wanted to be like my neighbor who was an illustrator, so he worked with airbrush, because that was really popular at the time.
Yeah.
And, he did a lot of movie posters and album covers and all that stuff. And over time, as I got through high school, animation was becoming big. And, like, The Little Mermaid and, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, along with The Simpsons,
Mm.
like, for me, like, those 3 things, like, there was other stuff too all going on, but those were, like, the 3 big things that, like, blew up animation, and then you get Ren and Stimpy and all this other stuff, and then Nickelodeon with Doug and all these things happening, and Rocko's Modern Life, and all this stuff is happening all over the place. And, and then you also had, uh, um, um, Nightmare Before Christmas was, close to that time after.
Yeah.
But, so all that stuff started happening, and I was wow, like, look at this, like, it's not old animation, it's new,
Yeah.
and it's like,
Yeah.
and me as I get older, this stuff is cooler than the kind of '80s after school cartoons, like, in terms of quality and stuff like that. And, like, Saturday morning cartoons, they really turned anything into a cartoon, like, anything, and it gets really weird, the more you look at it. And at that time, my neighbor, his work as an artist was starting to get hard because things were just starting, not get digital, but Photoshop
Mm.
was just appearing,
Yeah. Okay.
and that was on the horizon. But then, the style of painting, for illustration was airbrush was becoming passé,
Yeah,
and it
sure.
was getting harder for him. And I, saw some of his, like, work that he was doing was, like, doing ads and, expertly rendered, meticulous, like, beautiful stuff. Um, but I wasn't sure, like, well, like, I love these cartoons, and now I love comics. Like, how do I make that work?
Mm.
And when I was in high school, my parents took me on a trip to, Florida. My dad had a business trip, and they brought me along because they thought I'd love to see Disney World and everything there.
Yeah, sure.
And at the Hollywood studio, there was opened as MGM Studios. Uh, they had, an animation tour, and, I've actually met people that worked in the studio
Cool.
on that, like, sat in this place, and there was a thing the animators all called the fishbowl, where basically they turned a whole animation pen right into it like a zoo exhibit. And so, like, all these hordes of people walk by all day long, and there's, like, this, like, plate glass window,
Yeah.
and you're looking down, and it's
No
just a
way.
whole office with animation desks and everything, and everyone's working, and you're all just, like, staring at the glass, like, "Don't poke on the glass,
Yeah.
don't," "Bucks bully rag," all the animators within.
That's amazing.
But when I saw them, working. Like it was the counterpoint to what my neighbor had. And I loved what my neighbor was doing when I first met him. But then I thought, well, he sits alone all day, working on his
Yeah.
stuff, toiling away. And then I saw this collaborative process where everyone is working together. And, because it's this fishbowl exhibit, they have like a little bit of everything all in this tiny area of the floor. So you see an animator, you see an in-betweener, you see, a person doing a layout, you see a person doing a background painting. And it's while they're doing real work, it's a little bit of a, like a sensationalized
Yes,
version,
yeah.
but it was enough to work on me. And at
Nice.
that moment, and this is before I graduate high school, at that moment I was like, okay, I've got to be an animator. Like this is the world. So it started from just loving drawing, loving comics. And then I used to say before that, like, because that was how my neighbor introduced himself. He was a commercial artist. I want to be a commercial artist. And then like, people would ask me like, well, what does that mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
commercial art. I had no idea. Um, and then this trip happens, and then yeah, from there on out, it was just
Oh,
animation this, animation that, and it just became this whole thing where the first version of 3D Studio came out when I was in high school, and a
right.
friend got a cracked version of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so we taught ourselves how to make stuff in 3D.
Wow.
So I was drawing and doing this stuff in 3D, like trying to make Millennium Falcons, out of squishing spheres
Excellent.
together, in like 1990. And yeah, it was from then on, it's just been a whole road from that. And then just one little short anecdote getting beyond that, what was really fun is for me, was a really special moment is 30 years later, I'm working for Imagineering and I'm being a VFX supervisor and directing all the animation for all the media that for the story of this ride, the first ever
Yeah.
Mickey ride that's going into the same park, which is
Mm,
now Hollywood Studios in Florida.
amazing.
And I happened to be there on a day where we were installing when it was the 30th anniversary of the opening of the park. And I had been there not on the opening day, but that year that it had opened.
Wow.
And so 30 years, and I'm there on the opening day. And so you could walk into the animation building and there from backstage,
Yeah.
and I could just go stand in that fishbowl. And it was all closed down. There was a bunch of cubicles there. It turned into offices, people
Right.
just doing random things, when they got rid of animation in the early 2000s. And so it was kind of like dark and all that way, but
Yeah.
you can see the boarded up windows. But then I'm sitting there in this moment just by myself in this whole room, looking up where I, used to be
Yeah.
like, 30 years ago, and here I am, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm making the first ever Mickey ride. And it was just
That's amazing.
such a special, like, yeah, for me, it was like, and I just sat there for like 10 minutes, just
Soak it in.
silence, just
That's
looking around.
amazing. Yeah. What was it about Robotech in 1985 that blew your mind?
Yeah. So, around that time, coming out of the 70s, you had some Japanese, animated shows. A lot of the stuff we saw in the States was Speed Racer,
Mm,
and there was the show Gatchaman that was
yeah,
out as Battle of the Planets
that's
here.
right.
Kind of bastardized the story for American audiences. There was a
Yeah,
lot more of that then. But it was always like this slow uptick in Japanese animation.
yeah.
And then, as they started to move animation overseas, you would get these TV shows that are animated or done in Japan, while it was still cheap enough to do it there before it moved to the Philippines and Korea and
Mm.
everywhere else. But like these shows had these incredible intros where like they're immaculately animated and you're like, oh my God, this is cool. So like, shows like Thundercats come on the air and you look at the credits and you're like, that looks really cool. And then the
Yeah,
show starts and you're like, it's still pretty cool, you know,
yeah.
just not
No,
as
no,
cool as
that's
the
cool.
intro. Um, but I watched, a lot of I loved shows like that. So I loved Voltron. I loved, like I said, Thundercats, and they're all toy based
Yeah.
things to get you to buy toys, and so the stories are fun, and there's things that are charming and things that you love about them. But there is always this especially with like Thundercats, there was always this kind of like reset button, where like,
Yes.
yeah, there might have been some themes that went on, but it was like, oh, what are the mutants going to do today? And
Yes.
oh, and you'd meet new characters, but it wasn't very linear. It wasn't very epic. It was trying to be like, what's the new adventure today?
Yeah.
And so the idea of these season long arcs of just a single story of this you know pantheon of like this human experience in this show was
Yeah.
completely new. And before that time, um on a lot of the stuff, you'd have some of the robot shows and they'd be like big robot shows. So like, there was Transor Z, but they were like these kind of, 1970s to early 80s kind of cartoony robot designs, and nothing that seemed to have the detail that seems like it could be real.
Yeah, sure.
And, when I was in junior high, so I'm kind of at the right age, I'm kind of feeling a little too old, for He-Man,
Yeah.
at the time. That was a little silly to me. I was just a few years old enough that I just like that seemed like kid stuff to me.
Yeah, sure.
And then this show comes on and like people are dying in it. Like characters are getting killed and, buildings are getting destroyed and whole communities are getting displaced, as the ship like gets attacked right in the first, episode or second episode. And then like the whole city is, getting folded into space and transported to the outside of the solar system, and it blew my mind. It was like, all the while, you're loving live action movies and Star
Yeah.
Wars had a lot of this, operatic stuff, and this was like, oh my god, this is like a Star Wars kind of show, not in terms of like theme or look, but like,
Yeah.
it felt like it was trying to tell an emotional story that like I could believe in, and it wasn't just like trying to sell a toy.
Yeah.
That
That's
came
amazing.
later. Um, but, yeah, I just absolutely loved the danger. I loved that I felt like it didn't talk down to me. I loved that it had, real stakes and that main characters would die along the way. All these things that kinda set up for me in a way when people my age grew up and then, started making TV shows themselves. And then you start having stuff where main characters die, you start having these longer arcs. Like, for me, it was the beginning of that, and, God knows if that show was influential in that way, but for
Mm.
me, it's connected, that way,
Yeah. Yeah.
where I see kind of trends in modern storytelling, with streaming and stuff like that, with, like, getting away from the episodic, singular storytelling episode.
A gigantic alien spaceship broke through the very fabric of hyperspace on a collision course with the Earth. During its uncontrolled fall from the sky, the plummeting space fortress produced shockwaves of incredible force.
Yeah, that's something I was alluding to when we spoke off camera at the beginning, though, is that
Mhm.
as I started to research into it, I could see why and how it would grab younger heads at that point, because there doesn't seem like there was anything like that.
Yeah,
And like you said, but there, because of that syndication outlook of, we just want something every day. We just want to sell a toy. Let's sell some
yeah,
toys. How can we? And it's quite funny doing these interviews with people and talking about the specific shows. And the majority of shows stemmed from, how do we sell this toy? And then looking at this, like you said, but there, yeah, the toys came afterwards. It was all about the story of the show first, and I
yeah,
can see how fresh that would have been back in the mid '80s.
yeah. Yeah, especially you're watching like another show I watched, religiously because I loved playing the toys was G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
And,
Okay. Yeah.
that was me starting out at like 9 years old, when the toy line comes out. And
Yeah.
then it's like, then the show comes out. And then every episode, you see gags on this. They actually did a spoof on this stuff with the Transformers on The Simpsons once, where it's the Chocobots and they're battling Nougatron. It's just it's like all these shots are like product placements. Like there's no
Yeah.
reason in the story to have this stuff in there, and so that was a lot of it. And so even though I loved like the toys and everything as I was getting older,
Yeah.
I did love this show because it did start out that way. And then I don't know if they expected the show to do as well as it did in the few years that it aired. And so there was all these weird things with rights. And so then American companies were tasked with trying to make toys that were based on an anime show, when instead of importing the toys that companies like Bandai would make, which were like really good, and you was so hard to get here, and then they would make these kind of cruddy Americanized softer versions of it, and then you were just kind of like, why? Yeah,
So the one thing looking at this now, and I think the major difference between the UK and the US was
yeah,
the syndication thing. Now, we had syndication over here, but I'm trying to think back of a show that we would watch every day, and I can't actually think of any. I don't think any of the cartoons that we watched, certainly ones from across the pond, they were still weekly,
yeah,
but you would have watched this. So it was 85 episodes for a syndicated series. That's a show every 5 days for 13 weeks.
yeah, yeah,
And that, I don't know why, but that blows my mind a little, because knowing that every day for that amount of time there would have been a show on for you to go home or watch, or if it was on in the morning or whatever.
yeah,
But it's the syndication that resulted in this show, isn't it? It
yeah.
resulted in the sort of bastardization, as you said earlier, of the production process of how it was created.
It's there was so many different types of shows that would get put on, and there was kind of like a marked difference between weekday shows and Saturday
Mm,
morning cartoons. Saturday morning cartoons just seemed to be like a different air of cartoon. And I don't know if they were like sillier or funnier. I don't know. They were a little bit more silly. You would have stuff like Justice League,
mm,
but and that aired like from like 19, I don't know, 75 or 4 or something, all the way until almost 1990. Like it was on TV for a long time through different versions of it. But it was also kind of humorous. Like it wasn't just pure like dramatic action. And but the weekday stuff was a little bit more toy based. And so you'd have like, Thundercats on the weekday, you'd have GI
yeah,
Joe on the weekday. Show like Silverhawks would either air in the
yeah,
morning or on or in the afternoon. Um and so you just had this block, and they were always looking like, I think, and this is just me guessing, but like, children's attention spans are supposed to be short, or they were felt to be short. And so they're just trying to feed the beast of what new thing they can have like every year.
yeah,
And so, they had these 3 different series from Japan, and they basically bought the rights to them here. And all they had in common really was that some of the creative talent that made them in Japan were the
mm,
same amongst the 3 series, but there was no story relation. They were just all their own thing. And then they had to find a way to tie them in, just as a way to fill out that block.
yeah.
Like
Although that
it was
block of
like, we've got
85
this block to
episodes.
fill. Yeah. And
Wow.
so then there's like this convoluted kind of writing process to try and find some way, with the mouth
Yeah.
waggle, to shoehorn in a story and dialogue that
Something.
works. And I guess we'll talk about it a little bit more in a bit, but like, when you watch it now, it's like the story absolutely does not work. It's all over the place. It's crazy. But at the time, like it really felt like it worked. And as far as the States go, when I got into animation, my first job was working on Futurama, and the goal at that point for a show because this was how people made money. Because there's different like nationwide distribution markets on local affiliate stations and how that show gets aired. And so your show might start on a main network and you'd have an initial order of a show where you would make like, 22 episodes for a season of like
Yeah.
22-minute long episodes with, commercials for 30 minutes. And you wanted to get to at least like 85. And if the show was popular enough, once you got to like 85 episodes, then you could get a syndication deal. And they would basically, especially with cartoons, they would usually just make enough to get to the syndication, because once they had syndication, it was a way to sell the licensing distribution of the show to different markets, because not everyone around the country would see the same. Your shows would be aired kind of regionally. So
Sure.
like depending on where you lived in the country, you'd kind of see the same stuff, but in a different order or on different days. And it really just depends on where you grew up. But and then some markets wouldn't get it at all.
Wow.
They would focus mainly on like, bigger markets because there was more eyeballs, right?
Yeah.
So that's more populated areas, which tends to be more around the coastlines. Um, and so once you got to that 85, it's almost like, at that time, a show felt like it could just keep airing forever, because it would just do nothing with advertising revenue, just generate money like crazy. And it's
Yeah.
why there was all those old cartoons, and the model, the way it worked is stuff like, Tom and Jerry and Woody Woodpecker and the Looney Tunes. They hadn't really made those, in like 30
Yeah.
years, but they would just keep airing the library, and people would watch it because you only had, you only had 2 through 13, and out of 2 through 13 on the telly there, it was only like 7 of those channels actually had stuff.
Yeah. Sure.
And so you were kinda glued to it, so they could just make money, like, seemingly indefinitely,
Yeah.
without having to expand on making any effort to pay for it again. So it
Mm.
was like free money at that point,
Yeah.
And, so the goal was always to try and find as they would call it, right, a property that you could exploit and make just enough on to get it syndicated, and then once you did, it would just air, and
Yeah.
that's what it was. They were, for the most part, they're commercials, right? They're commercials disguised as entertainment, and
Yeah.
the more you watch it, like the more money they make, the more toys you buy, because they're making advertising revenue on the hours watched, and they're making
Yeah.
revenue on this licensing and the sales. And then once things get to licensing, it's like going on shirts, it's going on shoes, it's going on lunch boxes, and that's been kind of the paradigm, that
Yeah.
everyone's been working on, especially in the States on animation, all these years until like now.
Yeah. 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 It's like that's all culminated in the streaming wars.
Yeah, and now that whole, the advertising revenue doesn't exist the same way.
Mm.
It doesn't make it profitable to make shows anymore,
Yeah.
because kids don't consume toys like they used to.
Mm.
And right, as we know, the way media is changing, and younger eyeballs are going to other things, and
Yeah.
they've never really had this competition until these last 15 years or so
Yeah.
has really accelerated. And so we are moving to a different thing. But yeah, from like syndication going from 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s,
Yeah.
early 2000s, it was just the way it was, and it was the
Yeah.
way to
That's
make
right.
money. And yeah, it was extremely successful for a long, long time.
Yeah. That's really interesting because, like, from again on our side, we when I was little, we only had for a long time we had 3 channels. It was the BBC with British Broadcasting Corporation,
Yeah.
and we paid license fee for that. They would have a budget. They would make their own shows. There was no advertising, so that was sort of publicly funded and government funded. And then what we had on the 3rd channel was a range of regional television networks. So some northern, we living in Wales, we had the Welsh one, and Tyne Tees and London Weekend Television, and they all had budgets, and they were all advertising revenue, so they were looked at it in a
Okay.
similar sort of manner. And some regional networks would make shows that would get shown around the country and that, and then sort of early to mid 80s, we had an extra channel started, which was called Channel 4. But also, there was S4C, which was the Welsh version of Channel 4.
Hmm.
So there was sort of funding within that then, and S4C would make Welsh animations in our language, and they would get sold then to BBC, to ITV, to Channel 4, and dubbed into English. But we were, for a long time, we were just focused on those three channels, and of those three, BBC One and ITV were the only ones that showed
Yeah.
cartoon series. BBC Two would have some educational, but puppet-based shows, but not so much animation. So
Uh-huh.
even though looking back at it now, compared to what's available now, you'd think, oh my God, we were starved. But we weren't. There was
Yeah.
probably more animation on those two channels then than there is on the majority of a lot of stuff now,
Sure. Well, I think, the thing that was nice for us in that kind of age and the years we grew up is um, it was all like set up in a way where you had these blocks of time where you knew it
Yes.
was going to be there. And you didn't have to, there's that thing like when you're watching streaming where you have that crisis of decision. And
Yeah.
now
Oh
that you
God.
have
Yeah.
ultimate choice, nothing seems good enough anymore, even though
Yeah.
you have literally just about everything at your fingertips you could watch.
I think that.
And when you didn't have that, you just had to turn on the television and just see what was there.
That's right.
And
That's right.
it made it a lot easier, a lot more kind of like, like brushing your teeth and, doing the other stuff you had to do in your day. It was just there. And,
Yeah.
it made it so much easier to see. And, there was some stuff that was fun. There was a lot that was bad. But, and stuff that you just love, despite
Yeah.
itself and stuff that you still think is good. But yeah, it really ran the gambit. They really did try to appeal to so many different kinds of, children and viewpoints, and again, through the guise of selling toys. But, you had, princess and pony shows,
Yeah.
and you had He-Man, and then you had funny and slapstick, and then some of those things like, they definitely got a little bit too gender specific, where they just overthought like, those kind of roles of only girls like this show and only boys like this show, which is
Mm.
now we know silly. But you know, to their attempt at work, what they did, they really you did have a lot of options of stuff that you could watch between.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Thinking back, I mean, there's so diverse, but I never felt like looking back now. I was trying to think what would have been the closest to Robotech for us, and it was. I can only think really Battle of the Planets, which is the
Sure.
Gatchaman bastardization. That for me, growing up, that I always recognized that as a very different style of animation and show compared to the other things we were watching, with like
Yeah.
He-Man and Action Force, which was G.I. Joe over here. So
Okay.
I really wanted to talk about so the role that Carl Macek had in the show, because that sounds like a really interesting way that he sort of got involved in and eventually ended up producing the show.
Sure. Like there's this group of producers who could see the value of anime, and at that time we all called it Japanime.
Yeah,
Uh,
cool.
oh gosh. And there was, eventually they formed a company, Manga Entertainment, which is, the stuff that started bringing Akira here towards the
Mhm.
late 80s, and then
Right.
as you get into the 90s, bringing Ghost in the Shell. And
Yeah.
so I think you can kind of see this kind of linear progression where you see a dabbling of Japanese animated shows, like, where you could see Astro Boy,
Yeah.
some places, and you would see Battle of the Planets as Gatchaman, you would see Speed Racer, but they were like a handful. And then you start getting like Voltron and then this Robotech and it's Manzinger. That was I was trying to say. Manzinger was as Transor Z
Right.
here. These shows they start propagating. They get more and more. And
Yeah.
and Carl was one of these, as far as I understand it, early producers who could see the value of purchasing these shows. And
Mm.
I think my understanding of it was that, you know, the thought was these shows were made for a Japanese market, and a Japanese market isn't going to work on an American audience. So we need to make this
Yeah.
work for an American audience. And it's all based on, they're all preconceived biases, right? Of what they think, kids want to watch or what they think story beat is going to work versus not work. And I think time has shown that that kind of thinking was kind of erroneous. And people like the project for what it is, and they should just basically translate it, and just bring it over, as it's supposed to be, which is, what you see now a day. It's taken like
Yeah.
30, 40 years to get there. But then, there was some other issues I know too, where the markets were a little bit different. So like Gatchaman had some bloodier scenes. So only if you watch the original Japanese Gatchaman will you see
Oh,
the full story, and it's just like stuff with like people getting blown up and blood and stuff like that. And some the science team ninjas would basically you'd see their throwing birds like stick into people, and those
yeah.
shots were like cut out of American TV. And I know that probably happened in the UK too, because
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember the UK had all the really strict rules about horror movies and all that stuff. If you remember, there is this MTV show called Liquid Television
Right. Yeah.
around the
Yeah.
early 90s when animation was really blowing up. And Liquid Television was like a variety show where they would just basically find like shorts from like there used to be a traveling show called Spike and Mike's
Yes, I
Chicken
know.
Twisted cartoon show. It's where Beavis and Butthead came from. So you'd see like a Beavis and Butthead short. You'd see this other anime short that Carl Masick produced and brought over from
Yeah.
Japan. All this random stuff. So like his name popped up a lot on some of the first stuff. We remember seeing of Japanese animation here.
Yeah, that's cool. He seems to have had a hand in quite a lot, like you said, a lot of stuff afterwards, and being involved in things like Dominion Tank Police and Vampire Hunter
Mhm.
D and all the sort of things that started to hit for me when I went to art college, and
Mhm.
it's quite funny as well because again, I find it strange that you had all access to all these cool shows on television, whereas over here we didn't. We had very few of this. If we found it, we would have found it on VHS in a local rental store or something. Like a lot
Yeah,
of my access to these sort of animations were just finding a really cool video cover and
sure.
thinking, "Oh, that looks like Battle of the Planets. I'm gonna try that." And
Yeah.
it's quite funny though. There's only a couple of years gap between with our age, and it's like a lot of my stuff came from VHS,
Mhm.
and not just from television.
Yeah. Well, I will say it did start to switch a little bit here as you got into the 90s,
Mm,
because, like, unless you were, like, someone that had gone to Japan, you had almost no idea,
sure.
who, Hayao Miyazaki was. So there was, like, a lot of the mainstream stuff, like, yes, we got Robotech, yes, we had, like, Manzinger, Battle of the Planets was really big in the late '70s, and those things kind of existed, but you're mentioning, like Dominion Tank Police and Vampire Hunter D, and stuff like that. AD Bubblegum Crisis, AD Police, all that stuff wasn't here on TV ever, and
Yeah, sure.
that's when they started with the OVAs, um, and those were much easier to bring over as in the rental market, and that was the first way you ever saw it.
Uh,
So the person I was gonna have talked to, that I thought had worked earlier with Carl Masick, his name is Mike Haller, and he was part of um, he was part of the kind of business team that secured the rights to bring Akira to the United
Right.
States for the first time.
Wow.
And that stuff, was basically like straight to video because
Mm.
the rental market was the place where you could find these niche audiences. Like
Yeah.
instead of like a general audience, like let's broadcast it to everyone. Well, this is going to be like a rated R cartoon. People aren't going to go see a rated R cartoon in the States. Like, so it's got to be a video rental
Yeah. Sure.
because then that niche audience, the people who are really rabid and look for this stuff are going to find it. And that is a lot of what happened as you got into the 90s. And I would say, aside from like Sailor Moon, which was on TV a lot, which was super
Mm.
popular, a lot of anime as it got bigger and all that, and more pronounced, was really a lot of rental business until we get to streaming. And then now streaming, it's like, you have Crunchyroll and all these channels just dedicated
Yeah.
to this stuff. And it's a whole different world. And now, whatever that is. There's so much of it going on. It's too much to get into.
I see.
But yeah, there was I would say there was, Gareth, like a kind of similar experience where like by the time I was like 17 and 18, like I had to go search this stuff out. And then you're like, this showed up on my video cassette wall and at my
Yeah.
local Blockbuster video, and I'm like, what's this? And it's
Yeah.
like Mega Zone 2, 3, you know, and, if you it was kinda like you felt cool because if you knew, you knew, you know,
That's right. Yeah.
and, not every and then, you'd meet other friends and they're like, "What? Nerd,"
Yeah.
making
Oh
fun of
God,
you.
yeah. I had that all the time. Yeah. It was like it was my art college life, and then my home friend's life. And it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, never the twain should meet really, because my home friend's like, what's this? What you nerd? What's that you watching? What you doodling now? And then there was the art college guys there. They're like, oh, how cool is that? What you watching?
yeah. Yeah, yeah, the art college people were, like, finding your tribe.
Yes, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So were you, because you came at this because Robotech was you were a little bit older watching it. Were you a collect? What was the sort of toy base like around it then when they actually started producing the toys? Were you a
So,
collector?
you started seeing, like, model kits, would show
Mm,
up, and, those would actually be, like, early, like, Bandai and other company model kits that would be brought here. I was really horrible at building models. I know my parents bought me a couple. Um, and Revell Models was a company, Revell here, that did
right, yeah.
models, had some of the first stuff, and that was like the easiest way, excuse
Mm,
me, to get some of that stuff that looked like it was from the show. And then some of the toys were really hard. It was really piecemeal what you could find.
right.
So like the original like Macross based Valkyrie toys, that was basically what Robotech was,
Yeah.
um, were really hard to find. And like generally you'd have to go like in LA here, near downtown, there's a Japantown where it's a whole area, like a Chinatown. And if you got to a store there, you could find it. You could find like an
Sure.
import and they would be like super expensive. And it's the kind of stuff
Yeah.
as a kid my parents wouldn't buy when I was, and like some lucky kid whose parent like maybe traveled or something like that, like would get one and you're like,
Yeah.
yeah. So they were hard to get. And then they did end up finally trying to make a toy line. By the time they got, because they were slow to pick up on it.
Right.
So there's the third version, they're like the 3 series. It's
Yeah.
Robotech is called the whole thing, and it's 3 shows. The first one is
Mm,
Macross. The second one is like Southern Cross or something like that. It's the one that everyone likes the least here generally. And
okay.
then the third one is based on the show Mospita. And those had like again done by the same designer,
Yeah.
had these other Veritech like fighters, these alpha fighters that, were just another version of it, of a type of jet that
Yeah.
looked a little bit more futuristic that could transform. And those toys finally came out here, and I had a couple of those. And it was kind of like at a time when I was in middle school between like 6th and 7th grade
Sure.
before 8th grade, where I would want this stuff, but it was also like I wouldn't tell anyone,
Yeah. Yeah.
because kids on the school bus and I remember, like, I remember being in 6th grade, sorry, side note, I remember being in 6th grade, sitting on the school bus, riding home from school, and some other poor little kid had snuck his action figures in his
Right.
backpack.
Showing
And
weakness. Can't do that.
and another kid saw that he had them in there, and that turned into a whole thing. And I didn't have them in my backpack or anything like that, but then I was like,
Yeah.
you know, separate myself. I'm not a part of this. I don't know what's going on, and because you just don't want to be ostracized. You're so
That's
afraid of
right.
what
Yeah.
everyone thinks, and kids can be super cruel, and
Oh God.
everyone
Yeah.
was, yeah, looking for a way to like find the kid that they could pick on to get a laugh of
Yeah.
everyone else so that they would be liked more, and
In my experience, it's generally the one who like to draw cartoons.
yeah, 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 me too.
So going
So,
back to what you said, Valerian, what was it about the second series that people didn't like then?
well, we had no idea what was coming,
Hmm.
and everyone got really invested in
Right.
the Rick Hunter and Lisa Hayes story,
Hmm.
as it was in Robotech with Min May, and it's this love triangle. And it's actually like something my wife and I, as we became friends at 15, and we both talked about how we both watched the show and loved it. And it's basically a soap opera, right? It's like
Yeah.
there's a love triangle, and will they, won't they? Who's Rick gonna choose? And but you got so invested in these characters, and like it really like you emotionally wanted to see where their story was going to go. Like you've been waiting all these episodes of this Macross series to see Rick and Lisa fall in love,
Yeah.
and then they finally do it on the last episode when half of the main cast dies and all the Zentradi guys are finally done away with, and it's like, and they end the show. We're going to build the SDF-3 and we're going to go to the stars. And you're like, "Oh my god. Oh my god." And then, that would be like on a Friday,
Yeah.
and it might have even aired on like a Wednesday or Thursday. And then the very next day after school, you come home, you sit down, you turn on the TV and you're ready and you're waiting, and then it's like this new show starts. And you're like, "Wait, what what where are they? Where did Rick and Lisa go? Why are they not here?" And they made the main character of that show be the daughter of two side characters from Robotech, Max and Miria,
Wow.
um, Dana, and it just wasn't the same. Like,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
as far as like the show, it didn't have the same scale. It
Hmm.
wasn't as big in its scope of storytelling. It was a little bit more closer together, and it felt a little bit more repetitive because they have these mecha battle tanks and there's this alien invasion force, and the alien invasion force is on this side of a valley and they're on this side, and they
Right.
do these sorties to find out some secret about something, and they fight and they go back and then they fight and go back, and then it was at that time where they're trying to machinate the story into having some reason to do with the robot, like the Macross version, and they're
Sure.
talking about the flower of life and
Hmm.
protoculture, and you're like, wait, is proto this they kept talking about protoculture like it was like energon cubes on the Transformers,
Right.
and you're like, wait, is this a thing, or is this a is it does it exist? What is it? Like, and the dialogue really makes no sense whatsoever. It's just whatever thing they say in a moment, and then it gets left behind. So there's so many of these like dangling pieces of dialogue that go
Sure.
nowhere and make no sense and reference things that never happened or you never see. And they start talking about it as if it's this lore, and there's all these blind spots in it. There's all these holes.
Right.
And so as a kid, you're thinking, well, there must be something that puts all this together. Like what? And
Yeah.
then your mind starts imagining,
Yes.
what it all is. And so it just didn't feel the same, and, it was such a harsh line drawn in the sand,
Yeah.
um, that, like, it just was kind of upsetting, and then when they got to the 3rd series, it was like they took this Mospita story and turned it into Rick Hunter's forces, coming
Right.
back to Earth.
Right.
You're like, oh, Rick Hunter's forces. And of course, he's not in the show because it has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But the dialogue in the American version keeps referencing him. So you're like waiting for him
He's
to
coming.
appear.
He's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. So that dragged you along with it. Yeah.
So did they write the ship then with that third series? Did it feel like it got kind of back on track, or was it a little bit more disappointing? Or
It felt better. I
Mm,
liked it well enough on its own, and it's also just, from a design sensibility, I just
yeah,
thought the robots were cooler.
sure.
Um, they were just much more interesting and fun, and the story scope again was, a little bit bigger in terms of, alien invading force, and Earth is in trouble,
Mm.
and it was a thing with both the Macross series and the Mossbeta one in Robotech is, basically the Earth just keeps getting destroyed.
Yeah, yeah,
Like midway through the season on Robotech, everyone on the planet dies except for the people on the
well,
SDF-1 ship. And it just blows your mind. You're watching a cartoon where they literally just ended the Earth in the most like terrible, and they're showing it like dad handing something to his daughter as the wave of destruction comes over to. And you're just like, you know, holy moly. And so the other series, this Invid invasion, is the alien forces. They show up, and yeah, they like have this thing that like decimates what was the Southern Cross world that was supposedly we just watched before it, and now it's like years in the future, and humanity's clinging to life on this planet that's been overrun by this Invid who
well,
now control everything. And then this expeditionary force returns to the planet to kind of win back the planet from the Invid. So it's like it felt dramatic and all that stuff. And so it's everyone, anecdotally from my experience and knowing the people I know that like the show, everyone's like, Robotech, yeah. And then like, yeah, we like this one. But you just wanted something called the SDF whatever, the
yeah,
big ship they were in, to show up
yeah,
again with Rick and Lisa and Max and
yeah,
Miriam. Like you wanted them all, and they kept referencing Admiral Hunter, so he's supposed to be older. You just wanted that. So even though we all liked it a whole lot, I liked it a lot, it just didn't ever pay off on that.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
and then they actually did try. Harmony Gold tried to produce their own version of a show that would tie all this
I
together.
read about this.
Robotech to the Sentinels.
Yeah,
And it was, you know, commissioned by Harmony Gold. And, so that meant, I believe, I could be way wrong on this, but I'm sorry. But my understanding was that it was kind of pre-production here, and then, done like a vendor type thing where, you have people directing and creating and writing the show
yeah,
here, and then sending it to whatever studio makes it overseas, instead of them just having an anime studio just make the whole thing. And so it looked and felt different, because it wasn't done by Japanese artists or designed
yeah,
by Japanese artists in the way that like they would do it. So it
yeah,
just felt kind of insincere, but it again didn't do well. And it was one of those things that came out on video and then went away. But then you were hoping to see it because you had to rent it, but you couldn't find it. And then you were it was this kind of mystery thing to get your hands on, to
sure.
see to see if it actually made it all make sense. But then by that
Fascinating.
point, you're going into high school, you're getting out of high school, and
Yeah.
you're almost not caring anymore.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny 'cause looking back at like obviously for the podcast, looking at different shows, and a lot of these shows I've not interacted with at all for decades,
Yeah.
and so you see all the little flaws and things like that, and then but there's one or two shows that obviously like I liked enough or loved enough to have kept an eye on over the years. He-Man
Uh-huh.
and Masters of the Universe being one. Have you sort of have you sort of kept a little watch over the license just to see how it's developed and if they could still do anything with it?
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things, like my friends and I growing up always wished someone would make like a live action version of
Yeah,
Macross, just because you want to see those things look real. I feel a little bit differently about it now, especially because we live in this era of animated movies being turned into live action animated movies, which
Yeah.
like seem to, I don't know, for me serve no purpose. Artistically, that is. Um, and so I feel a little differently about it for that. But I kind of gave up ever thinking that Robotech was ever gonna kind of
Mm.
advance or be anything else again, and then just wanted to go back to what it was, and that it was Macross. And there's this original movie that was made called Do You Remember Love, which was made before is what was derived into the series. So then the original Macross series would use some clips. So there was this movie that came out and it told this incredible story. That was one thing. And then they made a series, and then the series had like clips from the movie, but otherwise it was a TV show. And they kind of work together. They kind of don't. One was one thing, one was the other. They kind of go. And then after that, because the whole concept of the show is about, you know, a kind of militaristic, asexual alien race that only exists in one thing, toward doesn't like the fact that they hear singing makes them like,
Amazing.
go apoplectic. And there's a, I don't know. I think like the more you try to make that a story, I don't know. I personally have a problem like with people buying it.
Yeah, sure.
As much as I love all the other stuff, but it's like the central core theme to the whole story.
Yeah.
So then Macross, they still have Macross shows, and oddly enough, in the States here, Disney Plus has all the streaming rights to it except for the
Oh, right.
original Macross. So you can watch Macross 2 all the way up to Macross 7. And honestly, like they just they get too off the wall and too crazy for me, like where there's one where they're playing guitars while they're flying ships,
Awesome.
and there's and this is just a personal thing for me, but like sometimes I just some things get too ridiculous for me, where I just can't feel. And other people, if they like it, they like it.
Yeah, that's
So
fair.
yeah, but it's still out there. They still do stuff with it. It just
Yeah.
never ended up having like the same kind of staying power that Gundam did, where like
Yeah,
every
sure.
few years there's like a new Gundam series.
Mm.
But there was one little bright spot where in the 90s where they made this one special. It was either they made it first as a 4-episode miniseries and then combined it to make a movie version, and that's
Okay.
Macross Plus.
Right.
And it was kind of like a really fun, well produced story that
Yeah.
just was set in the world created by Macross, but had nothing to
Right.
do with the overarching big story. And it was like a really smart, fun way because, they're on this planet and it's about these test pilots, but they made it about a love triangle again with these two test pilots that
Right.
grew up on this planet. But because they didn't try to make it a part of this whole, like, kind of like some of the problems with Marvel Universe now where everything has to tie in, and it's just
Yeah.
like, well, just make a single nice story that works, and, then let it think about,
Yeah.
how instead of having to shoehorn in all this stuff because it was in the other movie. And that's what made Macross Plus great. So, like, there was some nice bright spots. And I still I have all the DVDs for the Robotech show.
Oh,
I still watch it. Like,
nice.
I like it enough to still watch it. I laugh at it. I think some of it's really silly to me now. But being who I am and in the industry we work in.
I was going to say, do you think that's a lot to do with your sort of profession and your experience and how your eye is developed over the years?
Well, it for me it maybe it's why I still want to watch it. I mean, obviously
Mm.
there's, you go belong to any fan group on Facebook and it's all these people who are in their 30s, 40s and 50s who just love all this stuff and they still
Nice.
consume it and they're not in the industry. So people just love this stuff. And
Yeah.
I think about it in terms of like nostalgia,
Yeah.
and I can appreciate that it meant something to me and it was um, seminal, or it was part of the formation of my makeup and growing up. And so I can love it in that aspect, and I can appreciate it. But I also don't love it as if it's in a completely non-critical way.
Yeah,
So I
sure.
have to accept it for whatever flaws I see in it.
Nice.
And that's okay for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes it weirds people out. Like I was sitting with a group of friends and we were talking about, that are non-industry people. And they were
Yeah.
talking about horror movies. And somebody was just talking about this John Carpenter movie, The Fog. And I really like it. I don't think it's a
Yeah.
good movie, but I really like it.
Yeah.
And when I said that, like I said, "Oh, I don't think it's a good movie, but I love it." Like this other friend of mine, she's a doctor and she's like, "Why would you say that?" And it's like but it's true. Like I can
Yeah.
appreciate on a level where think for making a film, it's a little slow. I think it just misses where some of other Carpenter's films are just really tight
Yeah.
and just amazing. And I like it, but I like it despite itself, and
Yeah.
that's how I take a lot of that kind of stuff, like I still like the original Voltron show. I
Yeah.
will still watch the original Thundercats,
Yeah.
not religiously, maybe once in a while, but I'll still watch them,
So where does the theme tune sit in your favorite theme tunes? Does it even break in? Because a lot of people have said they've talked about a show and then they've gone, the theme tune, it's not really in my top 3.
Sure. It changes over time. There was the soundtrack was released here like once, that I remember specifically, and I think maybe you can buy it on MP3 now. But it was hard to get, and at one point, for me, it would have been, like even as I got into my 20s, it would have been super high, because you couldn't find it, like there was no more. It wasn't on VHS, the show, it wasn't re-released on DVD, they stopped airing it. So for a period of time, from when I was like 14 to like 25, it was just like non-existent. And so then you're just trying to like, "Oh, where is it?" So, like, it was this kind of holy grail for a little bit where I just was like, I loved it, and the thing I liked about it, is that it sounded, especially with the opening theme, because it's not like a catchy song, that's like a rock song or like a descriptive song about the show. It's just like this, orchestrated pantheon of, like big broad storytelling. And so, when you think about like, the opening credits with the ship coming up on the flight deck and all this sci-fi stuff and the ship taking off and it felt epic. And so because of that, you really wanted to hear it. And then there was like the other like action songs in it. And then like there was like the sad love song music. All that stuff becomes like super recognizable like that. And it wasn't even like, for some people I know they really loved the Min-May songs. But I was never a huge pop song fan. So that stuff didn't mean as much to me. It was all the orchestrated stuff. But I'm still fond of it. I will say
That's
that.
fair. Yeah.
I'm still fond of it. If it, occasionally, I've got my Alexa here somewhere. I'll see if she'll play it, and I find it fun. Yeah.
That's
But
cool. Are there any others that stand out from your youth?
any others? Oh gosh. All right. There was uh 2 shows that weren't really big shows that I always remember, and one was this show called Zone Riders.
Zone Riders, Earth's most powerful soldiers, or Earth's last chance against the spiral zone.
It was this weird setup, where these bad guys use these, like, I don't know if they're like satellite things to create these zones where when you're like they triangulate, they put up these 3 devices and it makes a pyramid shape, and everything inside that pyramid people turn into mindless zombies. And so the Zone Riders ride these single wheel unicycles wearing like military fatigues and gas masks, and they drive into the zone to destroy the machines to get everyone freed from the Zone Riders. And of course,
I've
there's an evil
never
guy.
heard of that one before in my life.
Yeah. And it's one of those ones, like, I remember watching it. This was one that would air on TV in the morning, like before I went to
Right.
school. So I'd watch it like 6:30 in the morning. And when I mentioned it to people, they're like, what are you talking about?
Well,
Um, and then the second one is a Saturday morning cartoon show that was trying to capitalize on Voltron's success, and it's called The Mighty Orbots. And
okay. No, that rings a bell.
Go, mighty Orbots, mechanical heroes divided for real. Orbots.
there actually, I just saw a post somewhere that someone's trying to make a new toy based on it, and it's about a bunch of. It's not ships that are piloted that become a big robot. It's individual robots that have their own personalities that form a big robot.
Okay.
And so you have these kind of designs that look a little bit more Western, mixed with this, Japanese design aesthetic. And if you look up, you can look up the Mighty Orbots opening credits. It's
Okay.
like, I don't know, it's one of the coolest animated opening credits of any Saturday morning cartoon show. Now, the
Okay,
rest of the
and then
show,
go
like we were
looking.
saying earlier, does not hold up to that opening credits. But honestly, the opening credits is still pretty damn good. Like, I would look at it today and go, yeah, that's good work. Like, that's amazing. So, yeah.
It's funny. It's like the 80s. I almost feel like, so like my kids sometimes will moan about something like the graphics. Oh, the graphics are rubbish on this, dad, and I think back in the 80s, I had an Atari VCS, and I would look at the cover of the game, and it was this beautifully illustrated, spray painted illustration of aliens, and then I would play the game, and it was basically blocks shooting other blocks. It's like, yeah. Like we were from an age where we were always visually disappointed.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it's funny, you're talking about this kind of suspension of disbelief and what you bring to it to imagine what it is. And it's funny because, my parents were a bit older, and they would make fun of me for the same thing because they would feel I'm not using my imagination enough because I have everything just showing up. And they would say, when I was your age, all we had was a radio show, and we would listen to the radio, and we had to imagine the whole story in our head, and you just get to see it all, and it's funny how it keeps
before
going.
that, it was just books.
Yeah. We just had charcoal and cave walls.
Cave paintings.
Look at you with your pigments and brushes.
You're so spoilt.
Yeah.
The last I read about Robotech was that the rights were with Sony, and they've been with them for since 2015, I think. And there's, the occasional rumblings that they're going to do something with it, and then it never comes to pass,
Yeah, there's a weird kind of thing between the rights for what Macross is and what Robotech is. And
Yeah,
for
I can imagine.
years, until around this recent time, you weren't able to get anything Macross in the States whatsoever because of Harmony Gold and whatever rights they have on Robotech and what that meant for Macross. And I'm confused on like what you're saying. Like I haven't read up on it, like on who has what exactly in terms of what's Robotech and what's Macross.
Yeah.
But what I do know is, like right now, on Disney, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, but on Disney Plus here in the States, you can watch everything Macross except for the original series because of
No, I don't
Robotech.
think we've got any of that over here.
Yeah. So I can go and, there's like Macross 2, Macross 3, Macross D, like all these different things, even Macross Plus and 7, and they really, for the most part, all of them have nothing to do with that original series, but we still right now can't watch that original series here. And I know there's been talk of development of a movie, but nothing's actually moved on it.
Yeah. Wow. Would you like to work on something like that if it was? or is it you're just glad, you're just happy to have it in the memory banks?
You know, it's hard to say.
Mm.
Younger me would say absolutely yes,
Yeah,
I would love to work on it. And it's not that I wouldn't want to work on it now, but like it's hard to control if it would be something that you would actually like or not. And
yeah,
if it's going to be something that would come out and not really capture what I liked about the show, which is purely subjective,
yeah,
it would be hard for me to want to work on it.
yeah.
But if it
I'd
was
feel
like,
that.
if it had the right person attached to it and the right people, like for my mind, were making it,
Yeah,
that people that I'd like it's about the people who are making it. I would like to work with them. And if I knew they were going to be making it, then it would be like,
you know,
oh,
it's in
this would
safe
be amazing.
hands.
Yeah.
Ah, fair. That's fair. Oh man, honestly, that's been brilliant.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this. It's and honestly, it's just nice knowing. It's nice hearing your relationship with media over in the States and how similar it was and is to mine. You know,
Yeah.
it's how, you know, other sides of the world and paths are very similar in how we got into the industry and how, you know, a love of this sort of stuff as a kid ignited it, shall we say, you know, and
Yeah.
wasn't the driving force, but just sort of nudged you along that path, you know. It's really,
Yeah.
really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, it's I mentioned off the air that I host this lecture series at a local
Yeah,
university here, and I try to bring in people who are animators, board artists, producers, people who work in live action VFX, editors,
yeah,
composers, people that work in theme parks, video games. So I bring in people that have all these different areas of the industry,
yeah,
and everyone has, at the heart of it, some kind of similar drive and similar story. Everyone has this, even if it might be a different show or whatever, there's always something that like
yeah,
caught their attention and made them want to know more about it. And then everyone has this kind of convoluted way of trying to find their way and their steps into it.
yeah.
And their careers are never exactly what they imagined they were going to be. But they all get to a place where they're, happy and like excited and looking for the next thing to do.
Well, thank you very much, Ryan. I really appreciate your time. I know you're on a different part of the day out there compared to where I am over here. So I
Super
hopefully
easy
we'll
for
do this
me.
again. Thank you,
Yeah.
man.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for reaching out, and it's great to see your face on camera again. And yeah, it's been
Yeah.
really wonderful talking to you. Thank you.